Hello, everybody.
Hello.
How's everybody doing? I got to pull up the chat properly. There we go. Okay. Good morning. Welcome back. Lisa here and the lovely
Don Michelle. I feel like I'm a superhero. Don Michelle.
I love it. I think it needs to come with a superhero pose. So welcome, everybody. This is the Peggy's laughing. Why are you laughing? Oh, she's snoring? Oh, my dog is snoring, y'all. So if you can hear her in the background, she's having a real good sleep right now. Anyways, good morning. This is our second, or I guess it's our second live stream, but our first group of runes for the Boho rune study group. So welcome. I can't wait to dive into everything. Yay!
So exciting.
So how's everybody doing this morning? Let us know. Let us know if you have a nice warm beverage. And we have all the relevant links down below. So if you want to check those out at any point, you can. There is a link to the Boho Rune Study Facebook group where we're doing our sort of regular posting about the runes, and a link to Don Michelle at Boho Tarot's channel and all kinds of good stuff. Thank you, Barb. Barb is our link queen in the chat. That is awesome.
It's awesome.
Oh my goodness. So how did you do over the past couple of weeks, Dawn?
I got behind. But like one of the things that we've been posting in the group is like, it's not like you don't have to stay on schedule. So make sure everybody knows that. Like, we're just trying to get the info out there, and then, study it as you have time, because there were times where I like didn't do like a couple days, and then I do like 3 runes in one day.
That was me too. In fact, I don't think I quite got to my notes on Wunjo. I read about Wunjo, but I didn't actually post in the group at all about Wunjo, so I'm technically still a little bit behind. But yeah, I think it's a good point. Like, the reason we have everything organized in the group the way we do is so people can like go through it at their own pace, right? So
right, yeah.
Don't feel pressure for sure.
Yeah, because this is it's a lot of information to kind of try to digest in like the course of a couple days. So it's just kind of a jumping off point. And it's kind of funny because I did a little bit of research before to put the little guide together. And so some of my stuff is all changing now that I've done, some research into it. So some of the things that I was like, oh, this rune means this. Then I'm like, well, no, actually, now I think it kind of means more this.
I think that's a really cool like process though, because you kind of have your first impressions in a way, and then you get to revisit those. I think that's awesome. And I think it's great because there is so much, I don't know about y'all, but there's so much conflicting information.
Yeah.
I've encountered a couple that I'm like, but I thought it was this, what? Or this book says one thing and that book says the other, which makes it, I think, extra challenging. So there's that too, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like even in relation to like tarot we have all different meanings for tarot, but there's still kind of a basic underlying structure that everybody for the most part agrees on.
Exactly.
And it's a little bit different. There's some definite like, no, it's totally this, or no, it's totally this, depending on what you're reading. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
It's very interesting. And I think and please feel free to jump in the chat and add your 2 cents on this, but I kind of feel like part of it is because there's only so much we really know. I was watching a video about, I think on that cowboy hat dude, his channel,
yes.
about just in general, the pronunciation. And he was talking about how this is kind of what we figured out based on these other factors, but this language or this alphabet, the Elderfu thought, goes back so far that we're really sort of piecing it together almost in an archaeological kind of way, like trying to figure out what those pieces are, and even with trying to figure out things like pronunciation or figure out what this rune actually meant then. So I think that's a big part of it, is that it's just they go back so far. They go back so far.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what region you're looking at too, because like a language, it changes based on what culture you're talking about, what region of the world you're talking about, and so the interpretations change slightly depending on what what area you're looking at. So I think that also makes it a little bit more difficult, and it goes back a lot further than like tarot does. So there's so much more to it, I think.
Totally. And I think what I think one of my favorite parts so far actually about people's comments in the group and stuff has been the little comments about the shape of the rune have been really helpful, actually. It wasn't something I'd really spent much time thinking about, but people just talking about like, oh, this is how I interpret the shape to tie to the meaning. That's actually been one of the coolest things, I think, over the past couple of weeks is like, oh, like for Fehu, for example, picturing it as a tree that the cow is resting under, just like in Nina's card. Things like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's really helping some of the basic keywords or basic meanings stick. What has your experience been with, like, I guess, trying to remember them?
I've been using, I mean, looking at the design of the rune has been interesting too, but I said it in the group too, that Nina's cards, because they have a picture on them, which I guess, I know we're both like, where's Nina's card?
And I'm like, where are they? Can you grab it on my desk?
Here you go. I'll put it in front of my face.
It's a little bag.
So she has the picture. And for me, that's like when I can see the picture of it, I can make that sort of association in my mind. And that has been really helpful because just the symbol alone, I don't know if it's just the way my mind works, but I'm like, I don't know, it's just looking like a letter, you know?
Exactly. I think the pictures are so helpful. And I'm finding also, like, pretty much right away, I'm almost regretting in a weird way not having a lot of time to read, because I finally did pick up this, by the way. But I want to read this so bad now because Nina's book, her Rune Spiral book, actually.
Your runes weren't obvious. Where are they?
Oh, that's okay. I'll grab them in a sec. This one here she actually talks about the mythology just a little bit on each rune. So now it's like making me really curious about the tie-in, because a lot of them, she is actually grabbing the mythology and sort of wrapping it up with the meaning of the rune, which is super helpful.
It is, yeah. There were things that, like, there's things pictured in her cards is tying into the mythology that I had never come into contact with before. So being able to see that on her card, read it in the book, read it in Neil Gaiman's book, and you kind of start tying it all together, and it's like this really interesting, intricate story that before I would have made different associations, basically.
Totally.
I think of like, I think it was like Raidho, and I said that, and now I'm not gonna be able to find it. But when I first saw the illustration of it, I was thinking chariot. And of course now, you know, because I've been using these, my cards are all mixed up. Yeah, so this one of Nina's, if I can get my camera to focus.
Yes.
To me, was like, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, chariot. But now I can't, size. I should have looked it up first. But it relates back to one of the stories that having read the book, Nina's book, and then the mythology book, really, I'm like, oh, okay, that totally makes sense too. It's not the chariot in the terms of how we see it. So. Uh-oh, you're muted. There you go.
There we go. Sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, that I think it was somebody and her two cats. Freya maybe and her cats.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's things like that have been, I think, really cool because it ties right into the stories. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, okay. So yeah, I think that's been super helpful. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's so many layers, right? There's like sort of on the surface, there's what does the rune look like? What is the basic keyword? And then when you start digging, one thing I've discovered right away, I think in the beginning, I know, I was saying, oh, we can sort of match them up to the tarot, and maybe we still can, at least on some level. Mm-hmm. But what I found is that there seems to be a lot more complexity to every single rune than the single tarot card. So it's like, I almost feel like you need like 7 or 8 tarot cards for every single rune. So yeah, I feel like I in a way I've underestimated them. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that it's like each one is its own kind of rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm finding the same. There's just, I think that's kind of what makes it a little bit more almost daunting in a way, because they are so complex, and you're thinking, oh, there's only 24 of them, right? It's not that big of a deal. Well, there's quite a bit you can dive into with just one.
Yeah, there's a lot.
The whole set of them. So
yeah, I almost feel like after like a first pass, you almost want to go back through somehow, or because I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, just barely. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you then deepen it after? I don't know. It's something I'm thinking about, like how I can layer and gather more information. I think part of it is having more books, because I feel like oddly I've got 3 And I kind of feel like I need more. I don't know where that's coming from. But I think because the 3 I have each offer something a little bit different perspective-wise, that it's almost like with tarot. You have all these different decks and all these different perspectives, and you layer and layer and layer, and that's what makes the meaning more and more rich for you. And I kind of think it might be similar. Different authors' perspectives and everything. Eventually, I'll sort of layer and have it, but I still feel super, super, super noob. And I was expecting to kind of grab it, I think, a little more quickly just because I'd been doing daily draws for a while. But again, I was just at that surface level.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm kind of finding that I'm at, because the original, like the little guides that we're putting together for this is all my like initial just one book, because otherwise I was overwhelmed of, here's just kind of the basics of it. And then now at this point, so I have that kind of basic, just first layer understanding. And now at this point, I'm going back into everything, diving deeper into those resources. And I think I could keep going back again and again and again. And there's so much to learn in each one.
Yeah, there's a lot. There is a lot for sure. It's been really exciting to dive in. And I feel like, how does everybody in the chat, I guess, feel who's been following along? How do you guys feel about the pacing so far? Because we've been doing 4 runes a week, right?
Yeah.
And I like having that break in the middle. That was all you, Dawn. I think that's super smart, because by Wednesday I'm like, I need to catch up.
Yeah.
An extra day to dive in. So smart. I don't know that I would have built in a break left to my own devices, but that was smart. That and the weekend.
You're like, keep going.
Power through. But then you don't have time to absorb, and it's been really useful to have that time. And I've been really enjoying watching different videos. So I'm trying to. People are saying it's kind of quick.
It is, yeah. But
yeah.
That was kind of the whole idea of getting it out there, and then we can all kind of take a breath once it's all there, and we can really dive in and slow it down.
And I think if we think about it, like, this is literally like a first pass, because I think that's what once I shifted my perspective that way, it's helped a lot. It's like, this is our first pass, so we each get like a little bit of everything. And then once all those little bits are out, like you're saying, we have the unit set up so that we can just keep diving back through and back through and back through and revisiting. And I think especially for everybody who's just being exposed to the first time, even if all you do is look up one YouTube video for every rune and just give yourself a moment to like, okay, this is essentially what it is. I think a lot of it for us when we deepen it is going to come through practicing with them.
Yeah.
Because right now I think we're kind of in information mode.
Yeah.
And then we're going to move into more practicing.
Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, information is great. And I'm like all about the research. I could do that for months, but at some point you have to kind of like start putting it into practice. So hopefully we can, kind of get the basics down, and then we can start actually putting it into practice, and we can all like dive deeper in together, and it can just keep kind of growing and expanding, because I think it's probably like tarot. I mean, I've been reading tarot for, I don't know, 15 years or so now, and I'm still learning. Every time I read a guidebook, I learn something. So I think we're the same way.
Totally agree. And I know for some of you guys, like, you might need to join us for these live chats, whatnot, and like go at your own pace, and then come back in and rewatch, because I have a feeling these are going to be the kind of thing that people are going to come back to, and then like feed information into the comments and have more discussion. Same thing with Facebook. I think people are going to kind of go back. And I spent like the first week pretty much on Fehu and Uruz, and I really did some of the other ones went more quickly for me, but I think I don't want to have the expectation even of myself that like by the first 2 weeks, I just know the first Aett and I'm good.
Yeah, no.
This is not going to happen. I also agree with you, Dawn. It's almost like for some of us, at least I do this. I have this like fear of, okay, do I know enough to actually like draw a rune and read it? Do I know enough to cast a rune? And I kind of feel like, just like with the tarot, at a certain point, it's like jumping in the deep end of the pool, right? And just like, okay, it's really cold, but if I just go in the deep end, I'm not going to freak myself out, right? It's almost like that.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I think it'll be fun to see things unfold and see our ideas of the runes change and evolve over time too. I think that's to be expected.
I mean, I totally agree. It's fast. Like, and when we were talking about setting this up, we're like, how can we do this where this is not going to be like a 9-month prolonged thing.
Yeah.
So that people can integrate it into their lives in an actual workable way. So hopefully with the way, with the units, people can just go back and look at them, because I keep going back. Like, I've been back to Fehu I don't know how many times now over the last couple of weeks.
Exactly.
Where we started.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, as I encounter, like, I've encountered, I think now a total of 3, 2 that I knew about, I think, and then, or one I found out from the chat. Anyway, I'm expressing it weird, but different playlists on YouTube. So I've been trying to plug those videos into the runes, because those are easy for people who are like, I get overwhelmed reading too much. I don't want to say dry. It's not dry, but like too much nonfiction. Depending on the kind, I have a hard time. So for me, breaking up some of the reading with videos has been really helpful, because sometimes what somebody says hits me in a different way than what somebody writes. So having the 2 has been helping me not feel as overwhelmed. And I think, I don't know, I'm really excited, because I want to just be able to just throw a few runes down and just start working with those spreads. And this, oh, you know what? This is probably a good segue. How have you've probably worked with your books resources a little bit longer than me, but how are they working out for you now that you've used them for a couple weeks with your runes?
The one that I started with, which I actually didn't pull out, it's on the shelf. Let me turn around. Nordic Runes, okay, because it's behind me, was the one, and I posted it in the group too. That was the one that was like kind of my foundation, because I was coming into runes, or still coming into runes, totally new, never read a thing about runes. I mean, I've seen them, I know what they are, but I'd never actually worked with them, never actually dived into what each of them meant. So that one I think was really good. But what I'm finding is that as I'm diving deeper into other resources, that one seems to be a bit more surface.
Yeah.
Good place to start, but I'm actually finding that the Taking Up the Runes book, which, sorry for the glare, this one I posted in the group too. This one dives really, really deep, and I'm finding that it's really good, but I have to take it in small chunks because it's very overwhelming.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm keep like kind of waffling a bit about, like maybe that's what I need, because I feel like all the books I have are surface. I have 3, and one I'm not fond of how it approaches the meaning, so I've really got 2 that I'm going to most of the time, and I feel like that deeper layer is what I'm like wanting to turn a page and have just a little bit more. Yeah. So that one might be one I need to jump off the fence and grab.
The thing I also like about that one is she pulls in other resources. So it's not just her, like, here's my thoughts on it. She'll say, well, this person, attributes it to this, and this person attributes it to that. So it's kind of like you're getting a whole kind of grouping of ideas all in one, and then she kind of goes into, a little bit more detail about it. And there's so much in that book. There are parts of that book that I'm skipping because I just can't right now.
It's just too much. Yeah, fair enough.
Not right now.
I feel if I've been using this Rune Reading Your Life book, I picked this up because it was pretty. And because it was like workbook style, and I didn't want to like try to make a journal or do any of that stuff because lazy. But this has been great because it's got spots for you to write, and it's got a section in here. I will say this is the one that I'm not fond of the meanings in, because a lot of them aren't agreeing with my other resources, or they feel like they're a little bit fluffified, for lack of a better way to express it. But it does have a spot where you can put in, like, you can log your daily rune draws, and it's got a thing called 30 Days with the Runes where you do that. And then what I think is really interesting is that for the first week, you have an entry every day for your daily rune draw all the way through the 30 days. And then for the first week, they have you just draw a rune to ask a yes or no question. And the way that you know if it's yes or no is if it's face up, it's yes. And if it's face down, it's no when you draw it. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. So I worked with that for a week. I feel like that was a lot of days on just that practice. Yeah. But then the next one is actually reading situations. So you draw 3 runes, a situation, obstacle, and resolution spread, basically. That's been helping a little bit more because I feel like putting the runes in context a bit every day in just a small, manageable chunk, I guess, is
jumping in.
Yeah, so it's been helping me. But then I go to actually look at the meanings in here, and I don't love it. And we had a question in the chat I just spotted. Ginger Faye, please show again the books you like better. Oh, is that me? The books, or was that Dawn Michelle? I'll show mine, and then we'll check with Dawn Michelle. So I've got this one by the runes, and I've added little flaggies with every single rune, and the Aetts are over here, Aetts or whatever, so I can quickly go to the one. This one's good, but again, I've had a couple here that when I've looked at my daily draws, I'm like, huh? So I'm not 1,000% sure, and I've written about that a little bit in the group, like, oh, this book says this, but then this book says that, and this is what I think. So that one's been really good for the most part, but it does only go shallow and it doesn't agree with everything. And then Nina's Rune Spirals. These are the two main ones I'm using. I've been really liking Nina's book. This one seems the most in line with all the other resources I'm using. Like, if I go to watch a video, I feel like it agrees pretty much with what Nina has, whereas this one is hit or miss for me. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. Those are the two that I'm liking better. And yours is Taking Up the Runes. What other books are you really liking?
It's really Nina's book, because those are the two that I've been using. The Taking Up the Runes, dropping in and out. I can show it again too. If I can figure out. There's my camera. There it is. Barb. It's like it's meaty, so I'm taking it slow. And then, but really, when I'm just like, when I get a little bit overwhelmed, I pull out Nina's card and I look in her book. That's exactly me too. I feel like comes a point where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't make heads or tails of any of this. So it's kind of like, take a breath. I can look at the picture, and for me, that's huge. That is so good. So that to me, when I can look at the picture and make that connection, it's kind of like, okay, that's where it kind of clicks in for me. I've got all that background that I'm reading and all the research, and then all the stuff that has been coming up in the group too. Like, I've been making notes of what everybody else is saying, and that's been really helpful, because everybody else kind of puts it in, what normal terms, like we're all having a conversation, whereas sometimes reading, it's a little bit academic. I mean, I like that too, but there's something nice to have it, and like explain it to me. Yeah, exactly. Like, I love it when Peggy reads something really like history or something like that, and then like explains to me, like, here, let me give you this book, can you just read it and then recap it for me? That's like the way I love to absorb information. And there have been one thing that's really nice, I will say, about the Facebook group is that there's a wide range of experience and knowledge in the group. And what's amazing about that is we have a few people for sure who are regularly sharing their understanding, their knowledge, and that just completely adds to the whole experience. And it's nice to have people that are learning like us, and then also people that are super experienced giving their perspectives. I just feel like we've had some really great bursts of information throughout. And I'm trying, by the way, and feel free, you guys, if you're in the Facebook group and you post something that's like a resource or is any kind of added information, like, we're also sharing a lot of our favorite like rune sets and things like that. But if you're posting something that you think should be in a unit, or that might make sense to put in a unit, just tag me in the post. I'm trying to find those as I go so that we can keep all the information organized, so that no matter when somebody joins the group, they can move through it like in a way. So if somebody randomly posts a post about Fehu as an example, and I'll add that to the Fehu unit, right? So if you guys do that, feel free to tag me if you think something should be in there. Even if you just stumble on a post and you haven't seen it in a unit yet, tag me, I'll add it to a unit. I think that's really helping me for sure to go back and find posts on whatever rune I'm studying, because I'll just go through the units, grab the unit I want to look at, and just stay on there and go through things. So yeah, I've been doing that too. It's been really cool. And that's kind of that whole, that group study, like, we're all contributing and everybody has, all different resources, which is really cool, because they're like, we all have different books and different resources and different videos, and that's really cool, because you kind of get all of these different ideas all kind of coalesced into one that's pretty manageable in terms of, reading through the posts and stuff. That's super true. Yeah, we had a comment here. I just wanted to read it because I think it's really good. She says, reading too many sources all at once is super overwhelming. I found it a lot easier to work through one book at a time, then kind of sit with what I've learned and then add in another book. Yeah, I think trying to work with too many at once has been a problem for me, which is why I needed to at least narrow it down to just the two. And believe it or not, I would actually, not believe it or not, but I would recommend, if you guys have a chance to pick up this Rune Spirals book, even if you're not worried about the rune cards, because there are full illustrations from the rune cards in the book.
I have been taking this literally with me everywhere because this is the easiest resource. It's got images, it's got a great overview, and it wasn't expensive to purchase from what I remember. And I'm in Canada, and I think it came from Lulu in Australia or something. And it took a little while to come in, but very worthwhile if you want something easy and approachable. I think this is a really great resource, whether or not you get the cards. Yeah. I got it to go with the cards, but I've been using it without the cards more than the cards. You know what I mean? So it's been great.
Yeah, I have too while we've been studying. This Nina's book, like it stays with my journal.
Yeah.
Like, they just travel in a little pair together.
Exactly. And then we had a question. So Ann Seidel says, I know the Bloom book is pretty old. Any thoughts on this book? It's the only one I have thus far. That's the one that came with the sets of runes way back in like the 90s. I feel like that was a set that came together. And I think it just says Book of Runes by, I think it's Ralph Bloom. I haven't read that one, but Acilian says the Bloom book has a lot of people very divided. Some people don't really like how he differed from some of the accepted lore and information. So that's good to know. I don't know a lot about that book.
I don't either. It was on my list to look at because like it's like a really cool old book. So I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, it does look really cool. Yeah. And Auguries and Signals says, I've been using Odin's Gateways by Kate Gerard and Runes for Beginners by Lisa Chamberlain as resources. That Diana L. Paxson book will be for my second walkthrough. Is the Diana Paxson one that is that the Taking Up the Runes one?
That's the Taking Up the Runes one. I mean, she might have others. I assume that's the one we're talking about. But I think that's a really good point. I think if you were to do Taking Up the Runes on your first pass, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So I'm kind of going on like my second pass here, and so I'm able to dive into that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I really want that book, but maybe that actually makes me feel a little bit better because like maybe I'll just use our Rune study group as an opportunity to do that first pass and then pick that up and maybe dive into it when this is over, when I've kind of digested and worked with them a little bit and I'm ready for that deeper layer, because I definitely don't feel quite there yet. So another pressing question before we dive into our recap, have you picked up any new rune sets since our last live chat?
I have not. I've been good. I'm not allowing myself to buy another rune set until we make it through our like. That's like my little ice cream cone at the end of the day. Like when we're done, when I finally get through the class, right? I can get a new rune set. But for right now, I'm behaving.
I got 2. So first of all, there was a local in Canada who had these. I could have theoretically made these myself, but these are made out of tumbled shell pieces. They're not tumbled in a tumbler. They're like in our local beaches here in BC and also on Washington's coast, there's these like thick oyster shells that are really common. And if you search, you can find them like almost like polished stones. They're like all their edges have been softened. And there was somebody in BC who had a bunch of these and literally just painted the runes on them. And they were really inexpensive. I picked those up.
Those are cute.
I had to have shell runes, and also the time I would have spent just finding them and whatever. I went the lazy route. But I also was going to get a set from that Forge of the Phoenix that, and then they were all sold out. And then like late last night, or was it late last night or this morning? No, it was this morning. It was
Saturday morning. She restocks her shop on Saturday mornings.
So anyway, so I hopped on that. But now I'm done. I don't need more. I'm good now.
My next one, I actually want to make a set. So I want to go I want to grab, wood from here in the Pacific Northwest, and I want to actually make a set. That's my next goal.
I think, I can't wait to see what you make because I know you're going to do something cool. I just cannot wait. So do we want to recap? Oh, I lost my face. I'm back. Do we want to recap kind of go through the runes and sort of chat a little bit about those?
Yeah, let's talk about what we've kind of been studying over the last couple weeks here and use that as a recap. I also have some stuff to share that we had in the group for those who aren't in the group. Plus, our group members just, they've got great ideas and great stuff to contribute. So
awesome. Okay, let's dive in. So Fehu is where we started. So here is our Fehu. And so Fehu's main keyword everywhere I looked was abundance. I don't know if you found any others. We talked a lot about wealth.
Wealth seemed to be a big one. So from the Wayfarer's Mark playlist, the YouTube channel, the key phrase for that was wealth earned through hard work. And that seemed to be kind of, if you want to do a generic key phrase, that seemed to be a good one that everybody was tapping into. But I mean, there's so much more than that than when everybody started digging in.
Yeah, I think that was the big takeaway for me is I always saw this as like just general money, wealth, abundance, resources, that sort of thing. But the big takeaway for me was that piece about it's earned wealth, it's earned resources. And whether that's even, I started to look at it as like more laborious, more like you're reaping what you sow in a way. There's an energy of like what you've put in is what you're getting back. Much more focused for me anyways on the like somebody said in here in chat, Good Journeys Tarot, effort required. Yes, this was for me the big epiphany in the study group, was the idea that there was work we needed to put in. It wasn't, this is not winning the lottery abundance. No.
Yeah.
And I think that was super helpful.
Yeah.
That was my big thing.
Yeah. So from the group, so one of the things that Kim had noted was that Fehu is wealth that you must care for. So if you think of Fehu in terms of the cattle, you have to care for the cattle before it becomes any sort of worth to you, right? I mean, dead cattle is not worth anything. So
there's upkeep, right? Like that makes so much sense.
You got to care for it. So I thought that was really interesting. Jeanette had mentioned in the group that Fehu brings us to realize how far we are willing to go to gain and acquire. So I thought that was an interesting take on it too, of just how far are you willing to go to get to that, whatever it is that you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Let's see. I also have here that, so Christy from the group had mentioned another resource that she was looking up, and it had talked about Fehu in relation to the food chain and energy. So think of food, cattle, food chain as an energy, and talking about Fehu in terms of not only cultivated energy, but inherited energy and earned energy, and then energy that's lost, because like when we eat, it only goes so far.
Oh, interesting. So like deplete finite resources that aren't like never ending.
Right. So resources, I guess that goes kind of back to that, wealth you must care for. You got to keep putting in if you want to keep getting out type of thing, which I thought that was really interesting.
It makes it more of a like more of a live process rather than a static thing. It's not like, okay, here's $500. Like it's something that's constantly an exchange of energy throughout.
Yeah.
And Acilian says, wealth doesn't always have to be money too. You can be wealthy in your health or your relationships. Agree. And there's still that effort and reward, or effort and benefit kind of relationship there. That's actually something interesting about just the runes in general. I've noticed is they're a lot more dynamic than I thought before. A lot less like a fixed meaning, and a lot more like a idea or an experience, which of course makes sense. It's just not how I'd approached them in the past.
Yeah, me either. One of the kind of quotes that I noted from the Taking of the Runes was, true riches are the wealth of the soul gains from a well-lived life. So that shows that whole other side of it, that it's not necessarily just about, financial gain. It's about wealth of the soul, wealth of living a decent life.
I love that.
I kind of saw that thread throughout the first whole grouping of 8, which I thought was really interesting. And I kind of noted in my notes that I started seeing beyond the surface level keywords that we have. There was this underlying thread in a lot of the different resources when I started diving into them, of each of these shows you how to live a better life.
Interesting.
It was fascinating because I really wouldn't have thought of it in that terms. I thought, they use wealth, it's cows, it's whatever, but it also can be that whole other side of things of this is, what you're going for, what you're working for in your life. So I thought that was really interesting because I noticed that was a thread, which I didn't catch before in my first pass.
I love that, actually. So I'm going to be thinking about that as we go through the rest, because I hadn't really made that connection. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so that's Fehu, right? Are we good?
I think we're good there.
Perfect. So interesting to me always how we go from Fehu, the domesticated cow, to Uruz, which is the wild bull, right?
Yeah, and so the main keyword or kind of key phrase, general meaning that seemed to be the tie throughout everything was kind of this unbridled strength or power.
Yeah.
But again, like all of them, so much more than that.
Yeah, like I started to really notice, this sounds really maybe strange to try to express, but the shape of this rune, like the forward leaning, one thing that I keep getting from this whenever I see this image now, and I don't know if it's because of what I read or something, but is this forward push, like this forward momentum. I definitely get that when I look at this, and the concept of sort of breaking through obstacles or blockages is something that comes through. Yeah, this one I did okay with, I feel like, but I also kind of I struggled a bit in the beginning because they're both kind of like, we've got a cow and then we've got a bull. Like, how different are they actually? But they are quite different.
Yeah, actually, so in the group, Rosemary had made that same comment, that she said that she didn't see much difference between cattle and bull, but then she started to realize as she dove into it that Uruz is more wild and Fehu is domesticated, which I think somebody just said in the chat too. Yeah, Good Journeys Tarot said that as well. So you're the two different sides, the domesticated versus the wild. And I also thought that it was really interesting. So her tarot in the group, I guess in the Uthark tradition, Uruz is the first rune and Fehu is the last. And so when you think of it in that terms, you think of Uruz as that kind of, what did she say? The primordial, that's what it means.
Right.
Which actually makes sense as a first rune, tapping into that.
Yeah, totally.
So, and then one of the things, so I think in the original, this is one of them that my kind of interpretation changed after I did the deeper research, because originally most of the stuff that I saw was like, oh, it's about challenge. It's like, you know, as a couple people said, it's like bull in a china shop. Julianne Victoria, she had mentioned in the group that, you know, it was about strength and power, but also being a bit bully, like being a bully or being bullied, which I thought was interesting. But then you add that, again, we're back to that deeper spiritual level, that it can also be about creation. So it's that primordial energy, and which makes sense in terms of if you think of it in terms of a primordial energy, it's like that great spark, which ties back into the whole the primal cow and the cosmic fire story and like the whole rabbit hole, right?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Oh, Good Journeys Tarot is Rosemary. Awesome.
Hi, Rosemary.
That's great. Yeah, and there was a bit in there. Her tarot posted a bit of an overview of this Uthark storyline with the runes, which was really cool to me, and I keep going back to it again and again and again. There's a thing
that got me to look into the primordial cow. The I think it's Adamala, if I pronounce that right. The primordial cow who is the cosmic fire, and like something about licks the ice, and I'm struggling to remember, but.
Oh yeah, here it is. Something about licks the ice. There's licking the ice, and then something is born from that.
Right.
Born. I forget now.
Yeah, I forget too.
I think mankind or something came out of the ice or something like that. If somebody may know. And there's also a reference here that just came up in chat that's also in Nina's book. Fix My Life podcast says, my book calls out Uruz as an auroch. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But aurochs, it says in Nina's book, was a wild ancestor of domestic cattle. There was something else here about that, but again, wild ox, right? So it's interesting to me. This one feels like mostly that pure raw wild energy for sure. Oh yeah, the first giant Ymir.
That's right.
Yeah. Out of the ice, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. So there's a bit here about sort of this almost mothery energy to this rune, which is really interesting when you think, and there was something I referenced about milk, I thought, or maybe that was in the previous rune. I'm always really bad at that. No, that was in the previous rune. I thought there was some other energy about that. Yeah, this is one that I just keep getting stuck on the sort of pushing through obstacles, and I'm having a hard time diving a little deeper in this one. I don't know why. It's just one that I can't get past that first layer almost. I need to read more, I think.
Yeah, I think like all of them, it has kind of like that base layer, and then when you dive deeper, there's, you know, so I mean, the tarot is the same way, right? You could really dive deep into a single card for a really long time.
That's super true. Yeah, Asilian says Adolma or Adumbla, or I forget the name there. The cosmic cow licked the icy rime to reveal Ymir, the first giant, and Buri, the first Esser. Oh my gosh, pronunciations, you guys. And then the Ymir's body after he was slain was used to create the world. So really we are talking about like that beginning of life, that beginning of life taking over or becoming a thing, right? And Pixie Jasmine says Uruz is very much mind over matter. I see it as endurance, which is also a really cool point.
Yeah. That's really good.
Being able to withstand.
Yeah.
And Nina has it associated with Taurus, which also kind of works for me, I think, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that works. That works well. That makes a good association in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so here's one where I definitely had some tricky territory. Thurisaz, or is there another name for this one, or is it just Thurisaz primarily?
I think that's the primary one that I came across. I didn't know all the different, because you could get lost in just all the different spellings.
So the two main things I saw associated with this were Thor, of course, Thorn, and Giant.
Giant, yeah.
Okay, so I always thought that Hagalaz was kind of which I know we're not there yet, but that one I always saw that as kind of the towery rune. But this also has some of that energy too, kind of like this idea of destruction and rebirth. That was one of the things I came across, which I didn't expect. I always thought thorn, kind of pokey, something's kind of poking at you. That's as far as I got before studying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I came across if you think of this card in terms of Thor, so Thor was seen as powerful but dependent, right? Or dependable. So he's always there, but he kind of like, he just charges in, he deals with what he needs to deal with, and then he goes on with his day. Like, he's just like, whatever, like, I slayed a giant and here I am off to go do the next thing. And so I think that kind of, it's like that raw, pure action that's just like, go in, get it done, get on with your life.
And very like, some of the things that I read, it was almost like very tearing things down. Okay, like the idea of a tower that you do yourself, like where you tear down the structure, like, no, we're going to deal with this. We're going to tear this down. We're going to start something new. I felt like I kept encountering that concept of like destruction, but in a really positive, moving forward kind of way. Like, I think one of my notes said something about, I can't remember, but destruction meets or breeds before creation, or destruction leads to creation. And I've been using this arrowy shape to remind me of that, almost like you have to push through sometimes, like you have to tear things down to build them back up. That's kind of one of my takeaways, I think.
Yeah, I think that works. I mean, then you also have like the other side of that where it's like, you know, you have the thorn reference, which from my understanding, that kind of came later. Like that's a more, I want to say that was the more Christianized version of it. You know, granted, this is just from all my diving in and out of all these materials, but, and that you can look at a thorn of, depending on, which Andy said in the group, depending on which side of the thorn you're on, it can either protect you or cause you harm.
Oh, good point. Yeah, if you're here versus here.
Yeah, if you're on the wrong side of Thor's hammer, you're in trouble. But if you're on the right side of his hammer, you're going to be protected. So I thought that was really interesting because it has a very dual nature to it.
I love that, actually. And this is this, I guess we've had reversals the whole way. We haven't really talked about it. Have you been looking into reversals at all?
I haven't, just mostly because like just the primary has been enough for me.
It's like, it's too much. It's too much.
I feel like reversals needs to come later. And that could be my own personal, because I don't read reversals in tarot.
Yeah.
So that could be my own like personal prejudice kind of thing.
It's funny because I actually started out going, I'm not going to do reversals and runes because I don't do them in tarot. And interestingly, I'm not trying to study reversals right now, but in my daily draws for runes, I'm definitely using reversals and looking them up and trying to see how I feel about them. And it's been really interesting so far. I almost feel like what I've sort of stumbled on is that in my own practice so far, it's very limited. But in my own practice so far, I almost feel like the reversals do help clarify the meaning of the rune in like a spread, which I know is kind of jumping ahead a bit. But this one I thought was really interesting because in Nina's book, it says overwhelm and victim mentality, which I thought was really interesting, like feeling like you're on the thorny side of that rune or on the hammer side of that rune, whether or not you maybe are, like maybe not, maybe kind of yielding your power preemptively in a way. I thought that was really interesting.
That is,
Yeah. Okay, Jasmine says, I don't see it as destruction, but rather protection. Thor is known to be the protective of the gods. It is about sacrifice that one must make to progress. Sacrifice, I feel like, was something else I did stumble on at one point.
I stumbled upon that one in the next room.
Was it next?
I got a whole note of it.
Ah, okay, interesting. So yeah. Do you have any other like comments or anything on Thurisaz?
Let's see what everybody else had to say. I think that so in the group, Jessica had said Thor's as the protector of Midgard and the primal force that brings about change and destruction represented in one single rune. I thought that was a really great way to just kind of concise.
Yes, I love that.
So, you know, change and destructions, like it can be, that's again back to that dual nature, which I thought was really interesting. And a lot of people had mentioned, you know, bringing in the aspect of the thorn too.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I noted was that, so originally the keyword that I came across in this one was misfortune. But again, going back to that first book, I feel like that was kind of just scratching the surface, because after I researched it, I don't feel that it really does represent misfortune as a general. So I kind of changed it in my mind to be force, because whether you look at it as a thorn or Thor or a giant, all of those are symbols of action that exert some kind of force, good or bad, depending on what side you're on. So that was kind of my shifting of it, because I mean, I'm sure if you're on the wrong side of Thor's hammer, that's misfortunate, but it's not necessarily always going to be the case.
Yeah, that's very true.
So
I love that, actually. Yeah, I like the idea of force. That makes a lot of sense. And like, force is often, whether you're on the giving end or the receiving end, you're usually not fully comfortable, right? Like you're in a position where you either need to use that force like to protect yourself, or it's being used against you. And in either case, you're probably not having a super great time, but that doesn't mean that you're not growing, learning, evolving, etc. So I think that's a really cool perspective.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. That one kind of came out of a couple of different resources, but I want to say like primary, that one was like the taking up the runes one. Was that idea of either, whichever way you see it, giant, thorn, Thor, it's all force. It's all like force being exerted. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Sane says, I feel like misfortune is when you allow the defensiveness to become paranoia. That's a really good point. And that kind of speaks to this whole victim mentality that it talks about in Reverse here. That makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. This was a cool one. This is probably one of my favorites of the week. So, Ansuz.
So I think for this one, the kind of generic keyword or key meanings that we came across was like communication, insight, and teaching. And so one of the things that I wrote was that it's concerned with communication in general, and Odin in particular, who gave the gift of spirit or breath, which is where we get that tie-in to Odin or Odin's breath or Odin's spirit, depending on which resource you're reading.
Yeah. Once I saw this rune, the way that Nina's illustrated this, you see like this Odin figure depicted, and there's these like little spirals coming out of the mouth. And that is so helpful to me, because I don't think I had any kind of an understanding of this rune, even memorable at all, prior to this image. And this image with the idea of like the breath, or the breath of the god, or whatever, this idea of like godly communication, of wisdom, like so much comes through with this illustration that really helped me understand this rune differently. The other thing that I keep thinking whenever I see this is cloak, and I don't know if it's the shape of the rune that makes me think of a cloak, but when I think of a cloak, I think of a cloak of sovereignty, of wisdom, of it's hard to describe. Maybe it's just a very personal symbol, but there's something about this shape that whenever I see it, I'm like, oh, it's the cloak. It's like the cloak of wisdom. It's this idea of also sort of, and maybe I'm getting it mixed up with something else, I don't remember, but there's something here about inherited wisdom, almost like over time, like the kinds of things, almost like like inherited wisdom is something that just keeps popping into my head when I see this one. I love this rune. I feel like there's so much to dive into here.
I think so too. And one of the interesting things that I found about this one was that, and you had mentioned this in a post too, was that it kind of connected to being in accordance with your higher self,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, what I put it down was like my personal key phrase now is, it was communication before, which I think totally works, but I've kind of shifted in my mind to be divine breath. So which speaks to me of aligning yourself with the breath of the divine within and expressing yourself authentically with the divine outwardly. So that was kind of the sense of it in my head.
Yeah, that was one of my big like ahas, was like, this is about living in accordance to me with your highest self, with like godly words, godly actions. It just, to me, it's like holding yourself to a higher standard.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to communication, that was such a big clue by 4 moment for me, because this is an area that I have to do a lot of work in my own life, is like how I'm expressing myself, and am I expressing what I mean? Am I pausing to think before I talk? This has a lot to do with that for me, this idea of, you know, considering the power and potency of your words before you use them, all of this kind of stuff. And it feels like a really powerful learning or teaching rune to me in that way. Yeah, very. And I didn't expect to see that in any of this, to be honest. I literally thought communication before. I was like, oh, it's how you talk and listen and stuff. And it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah. The other thing that I found that was really interesting is when I started looking at things, if you look at this rune and the previous rune, they both speak to gods, right?
Yeah.
We have Thor and we have Odin. And you have, if you look at them together, we have body represented, or the physical represented through Thor, and then we have the mind and spirit represented through Odin. So it's that kind of, I don't know if that is anything, like
now
totally making that up, but
it is now. That's so cool.
Interesting how both of these, if you put these two runes together, it's like your inner and outer selves coming together through the divine wisdom of the gods, which I thought was really interesting.
I love that so much. I'm geeking out hard right now. I love that so much.
I'm totally making it up too.
I don't care. It's really good. I love that. I love this concept. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And one of the things I've noticed about this first Aett for sure is that these are all big ideas. And maybe that's going to be true of all of them, and I'm just waiting to find out, you know what I mean? But but these are very big concepts that you could just dive into again and again and again. And it's already, just working with this first Aett, I feel like my daily draws have had so much more potency, particularly if I get any of the draws from the runes we've been studying. I'm getting so much more out of them, which is really cool. Oh my God, Barb, you're hilarious. I love you. So yeah, I love that inner outer idea. I'm like having a moment about that. That was really cool. That's a cool connection to have made. And it makes so much sense, because Thor is so much about physicality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Okay.
Yeah, and that also ties back into that. So the first Aett, however you say it, seems to be kind of concerned with like overall creation, right? And so if you put that underlay and underneath it of, you know, kind of more that, maybe that more esoteric spin that we like to put on things, right?
Yeah.
That kind of idea of working with these in terms of your own spiritual growth too.
Totally. Asilian's added some really cool stuff in the chat here, so I'm just going to read these out. So Asilian says, Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Ve, who are sometimes seen as aspects of Odin, created the first humans, and each gifted them with something. Odin gave them breath and soul or life. Vili gave wit and touch, and Ve gave them their physical traits. Okay, so that's really cool. So again, we're looking at sort of this concept of like the outward and inner divine, just represented in a different piece of the mythology. So I love that. And I wonder if we're going to find similar, we're probably going to find similar threads like that through the other runes too, but that's a really cool one. I really like that.
I thought that was really interesting. Like I said, I may have made it up, but it made sense in my head.
I think it's just like with the tarot though, like sometimes I'll draw a card and I won't get the traditional meaning from it, but it's rich and it helps in the reading, and it supports, you know, the higher good you're aiming for. And I think that all counts. It all counts in divination as far as I'm concerned.
I think so too.
Okay, so that brings us to, okay, now how do you say this one?
I think it's like radio or radio, right? Radio.
I really struggled with the pronunciation on this one. I've been saying Raidho, but I don't, or Raidho or something, but I don't know if that's right.
It depends on, I've watched a lot of different pronunciation videos. I'm not sure I recommend watching that many of them. Just FYI, because it's a little bit more confusing. Yeah, you just kind of got to pick one and go with it. But yeah, I think it's like Raidho. Maybe you're right. Raidho. That sounds right. I think of it as like tally ho, you're writing. Raidho.
I love it. Good Journey's Tarot says Raidho or Raidho. Okay, fair enough.
That
That's
makes sense.
yeah. So, okay, so I definitely, my perspectives on this one have shifted some. So I saw this very much as the Chariot rune, and I definitely think that's an oversimplification for sure, which I've discovered. But there is some similarities. Definitely journeys for sure. But again, I think we're kind of looking at this first Aett through almost a more spiritual lens, which is really interesting. What about you? Where did you sort of land with this one?
Kind of where I seem to go with all of them, I think. And I don't know if that's just ties into how I work with divination in general, maybe could be as well. One of the things that I found was really interesting about this particular rune is you could definitely, I think there's similarities to the Chariot, and I did see some correlations to that, but I also saw the correlation of it can be a reflection of your personal will and exercise over the path that you're taking. And so that ties into that Chariot thing. But the other thing that I saw that was interesting was that there were a lot of texts that discussed it as the right or the divine path, or like the soul path. So it's, in that context, it's more about the journey of spiritual work. But then you also look at it as it was also like about transportation and like literally going somewhere, literally taking a journey. So I think that was really interesting that you can see both sides of it.
Yeah, totally. The word that seemed to stand out for me the most was journey, and I think that's because that took that more soul path kind of vibe with it. Like it felt more comprehensive than the idea of just forward momentum. I feel like, because I often see the Chariot card very solar plexus and your will driving you forward and all that sort of thing, which I do see in this rune, but I almost see more of that driving force in Uruz, and this one feels more like that finding the right path, going on a journey, the labyrinthian kind of experience of finding your way, I think is really interesting here. And I also think it's interesting that when Nina chose to illustrate this, she mentions that she illustrated Freya with a particular cloak that helps her to travel between the realms, which I thought was really interesting. So there's almost an element, or could be an element, of like astral travel or of journey work, almost like shamanic style journey work, whatever it is that you do in your practice, right? Something that takes you into the different realms. I thought that was a really interesting piece that I'd never thought about before.
Once you read the mythology book too, Loki takes the cloak and does things with it. It's kind of funny.
Can't wait.
So it kind of adds just a different kind of layer to it, which
cool.
Not all journeys are good, right?
Good to know.
Sometimes you take a journey and you're like, oh, that was the wrong path to take.
Yep. Oh, Asilian says, I find that each rune can be associated with a variety of different energies and meanings, and which one comes forward depends on the circumstances. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
A lot of this is like tarot, right? It depends on the context. It depends on the context of your reading. I think we're going to see a lot of growth in terms of our interpretations too, once we start actually applying them. Exactly.
Totally. Yeah, Mantis's layer can refer to embarking on a spiritual quest, and Asilian says Freya's cloak lets her transform into a falcon. Oh, cool. I don't think I knew that, or I didn't remember it. Cool. This one is probably one of the most straightforward ones to me of the Aett that we studied. It felt the most clean. Like I didn't see a lot of conflicting information about this one, and most of them seemed focused on that concept of journey or of writing or will and so forth. So this one was the easiest, I think, from the week to study for me.
I think so too. The interesting thing that I found, the kind of thread that tied it all together, was it's the vehicle that travels on the path as well as the path itself.
Yeah.
I thought that was sums it up really well, because whether you're talking about physical or spiritual, it applies either way.
Yeah, I love that, actually, the vehicle and the path. I love that. Cool. Okay, so that brings us to Kenaz. Kenaz?
Kenaz. I think that's how it's pronounced. So that one was for me, this one felt pretty straightforward. And I think after reading some of the book and then Nina's illustration, really kind of that helped click it in for me. But it's torch or beacon, depending on, what you look at. But what everybody seemed to tie it into is that idea of the spark of creativity, that light of inspiration. So the dwarves were the creators of all the gifts of the gods. They would create things and they'd give them to the gods, and you could see that kind of represented in Nina's with the little dwarf with the little torch. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
And there was somebody had said, I was trying to like, oh, maybe it was you that said passing on the torch.
Oh yeah. And also this reminds me of the light of the hermit's lamp in a way. Like the concept of lighting the way of learning, of knowledge. And like when I was reading about this rune, one of the things that kept coming through is that the stories that are told around a campfire, or the way that verbal history, or what do you call it, oral histories are passed on. And this idea of how we share knowledge and share things around a fire, or how fire like speaks to that concept of knowledge and understanding. That's one of the things that came through a lot for me with this one. And also there was a whole lot I found about this one representing masculine energy, of also of sexuality and passion and other things that we associate with the element of fire, which was really helpful in deepening my understanding of this rune too. Because I did see it as a torch, but a lot here about relationships and love can come into this rune, I think, too.
A lot of fire reference for sure in that rune, I noticed.
Yep.
One of the other things that I thought was interesting was that you could see it as, fire lights the way, literally, can show us the way, but it also encapsulates that spiritual, that inner enlightenment. And so one of the things that the way I looked at it was like, you can use a torch to light your way, or you can use it to set something on fire.
Ooh.
Both ways, depending on how you harness and how you use your own inner fire, if you're looking at it that way, if you're looking at a more spiritual level. That
makes a lot of sense. And it actually says here for reversed, fire can burn and inflammation in reverse. So like how fire can get out of control, how it can, yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good thing to look at.
Yeah, there was some definite references to like the difference between like a fire in a forge that creates, or a fire in like a bonfire that can destroy whatever you throw into it. So I thought that was really interesting.
I also stumbled on this concept of this, and this was in Nina's book. There was some reference to the idea of kennings, which was, this was a type of poem, and it would describe someone or something in confusing details, what Nina's book says. And there's also, I think this is actually an Irish word, so I might be mixed up. There was the word ken.
Michelle in the group had said to ken means to Scots, in Scotland means to know.
To know, yeah. So whether there's an actual association there or not, that was a really helpful thing for memory to me, is this idea of knowledge and the kind of knowledge that you share with others, that kind of thing. So that helped too, as far as the root of the word goes. Anything to me. Yeah, it does say it in here. Yeah, Kenaz means to know, from the Dutch and German word kennen. So there's a lot of like overlapping information, which always to me helps the runes become more clear, especially when all the sources seem to kind of agree. Much more helpful.
It helped. Yeah, it definitely helps.
And Mantis's Lair says, shedding light on your path, dispelling dark shadows of ignorance. Love that. Especially as it's illustrated here, because we literally see this dwarf in the darkness with this torch, moving ahead with the torch. And Asilian says, kenning is a way of describing something poetically. There's a specific Norse form of 2 words, and there's a decent write-up on Wikipedia. Okay, good. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of think of this as like, if you're following past the track of runes that we've gone through so far, you're like taking the inspiration from Odin, you're going to put it into use on your journey, and then this is the what you're going to put out into the world. I thought that's like, you can kind of track it.
There is a progression, yeah, for sure. It's like, what are you doing with these like sort of gifts that you have? Yeah.
Not all the books, like, I don't know, maybe I was expecting somebody to spell it out for me and not to have to work for it, but
that's what I want.
Yeah, but I'm definitely seeing there is like this track that you can follow, which is, very interesting.
Yes, and we also have a couple other comments that I missed. So Sign says, go do the thing energy. Yes, love that. And Pixie says, I also saw it as a new perspective, a new beginning or an ending. And I think too, with this like sort of arrowy shape, you can kind of look at it either way, either an arrow going one direction, or you can look at it almost as your perspectives are broadening with that sort of lesser than great, oops, I hit the wrong button, lesser than greater than kind of sign from math. You can kind of see that as like you're expanding your knowledge or expanding your awareness. So that helps me visually too.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So that brings us to Gebo.
I feel like the last two are kind of people's kind of favorites.
Yeah, this was fun, especially because when we were on, this was one of the coolest things for me, when we were on Kenaz, I can't remember who said it, you might have it in your notes, but somebody said about how Gebo is actually made up of two Kenaz that are together.
Yeah.
And it gave me so many cool aha moments to think of Gebo in that way, about two flames coming together, what they create. And like, that was a huge like intellectual jumping off point for me.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. But this is the main keyword that I countered for this one before was gift. Mm-hmm. Which I think a lot of us had some interesting epiphanies thinking about this in concept of gift.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more with kind of as a group, and what I found, because I think when I started, I put gift because that's what it said in my resources, but it's actually kind of seems to be more about this idea of exchange.
Yes, X for exchange. That was such a cool, like, that was like a group light bulb moment, I think. With that.
Like, yeah, everybody was like, it's not just the exchange of like, giving somebody, I give you a gift. It can be an exchange of ideas, an exchange of energy, an exchange of physical goods. And, all of that counts. And there was definitely this idea of giving, sharing, and receiving in terms of that.
Yeah, I really, really, this was one that blew wide open for me because I'd always perceived it as, something good is coming your way today if I drew this in a daily rune. That's not what that necessarily means. It's like you have to spend to get, right? Like there's definitely everything comes with a price energy to this rune, as well as like for this idea of maintaining an equality to the idea of gift giving. Like it talked a lot of the resources I read talked a lot about how it was really important to be generous if you wanted loyalty of the people, things like that. There was a lot of like big ideas around give and receive in equal measure, and a lot of balance, and a lot of equality. Like if this were to represent a relationship, a lot of equality, both partners giving and receiving equally into the relationship energy. Right, a lot of that stuff came through, which was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Asilian says Gifu is the Anglo-Saxon name for this rune, Gifu. Yeah. And Sign says every time we make bread, we cut the Gebo into the top to give gratitude for the sustenance and life the bread gives. I love that so much.
That's interesting. We can definitely see that. That's cool.
Yeah, and Gifu was another word, another name that we encountered, I think. For sure. Sure, people comments about that. Yeah.
So one of the things that I came across in this one that I thought was really interesting was that in a couple of different resources, I came across the idea of sacrifice. So if we think of sacrifice in the term of making sacred, this talks about the exchange between the gods and the humans. So when we look at like Odin, who sacrificed himself on the world tree, he gave of himself to get something only to give it back.
Yeah.
And so if you look at like in terms, like it talks about on a more esoteric level, like the gods empower humanity, but it's humanity's belief in the gods that make them possible in the first place. So you get this whole exchange of one can't exist without the other.
Yeah.
Really interesting, going beyond the idea of just gifts.
Yes, totally. I really think just switching the perspective on the keyword from gift to exchange allowed for so much more understanding of this rune. And I don't think I'd really encountered that before the study at all.
Yeah, that was totally like a light bulb moment for me, because it was always everywhere I saw it was gift. But that kind of, to me, was a more narrow interpretation of it, whereas exchange is much more about, the giving, receiving, sharing, all of it together.
Agree. And Anne says in the Bloom book, he says, remember to let the winds of heaven dance between you. That's really beautiful. I love that.
I like that.
Okay, so our last rune in this Aett was Wunjo. Joy!
Yes. I did want to know, so Sky Dancer had said, and I thought that was really interesting, Wunjo is a cheery rune with its triangle flying high like a pendant of joy on its staff. I thought that was really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, that idea of like a flag of celebration.
A celebration flag, yeah.
Really cool for the imagery, yeah.
So I think in general, everybody's is joy and celebration. But again, when we dig a little bit deeper below that, like Jennifer had said that for her, it was also talking about finding your tribe, which you can kind of see that represented in Nina's imagery.
Yeah, because she has this like feast happening here.
So the gods all coming together, and
I really like that. This is one that I haven't dug deep into yet because I got all the way through Gebo, and then I hadn't got quite through this one. There's something interesting here that it says in Nina's book about how the word Wunjo is also linked to the German word Wunsch, which means wish, which is interesting.
I saw it referenced a lot as the wishing rune.
Yeah.
That you like put it when we get to the point of like divination and casting and all of that you can put it with other runes or other things, particularly like spell casting, to try and help you, manifest what it is you wish. I saw that referenced a lot.
And I saw, I stumbled on something that was talking about bind runes at some point, which is where you put different runes together to create a sigil, essentially. And it talked about how Wunjo was used frequently to ensure a positive outcome of whatever the working was, which makes a lot of sense in that wishing sense.
Yeah, I came across that a lot too. One of the interesting things that was really kind of different was that in one of the reference materials was it also related back to the realization of true will. So again, taking it to that deeper level, it completes the process of creation, which if you think of the first grouping of 8 is the grouping of creation, then this would be the completion of that. So I think
like the celebration.
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. And forgive the reference, everybody, because it's Abrahamic. But like when we think about like the concept of Genesis from Christian tradition or Christian ideology, theology, whatever, you have the idea of the sort of rest or celebration on the 7th day, which is really interesting. So it kind of makes me think of that, for good or for bad, like this idea of like once everything's created, there's a moment to look at everything and go, look what we've done. And also that makes me think a little bit of Four of Wandsy kind of energy, that idea of like the milestone almost reached, that you think of when you say it that way. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's one of those that like my initial keyword I think was wish, because that's what we usually associate it with or saw it associated with. And I use that to fulfillment because that represents both inner and outer.
I love that.
Talk about outer fulfillment in terms of, good job, you got it all done, let's feast now, or inner fulfillment because now we've completed the cycle of creation. So now it's moving on to the next phase, basically.
That makes so much sense. So man, that gets us through the first Aett. So those are the runes that we have covered so far in the Facebook group for the past 2 weeks. So that means
we continue to work on.
Yes, absolutely. But we're going to go on to introduce the runes of the second Aett. I'd be curious about, so you've mentioned that you sort of see the first Aett in general as like the process of creation and sort of laying everything out, I guess, for us. So we have a foundation in a way of the world is now created. We've paused, we've celebrated the completion. So interesting. I'm curious to hear about now the second Aett, which looks to be a little more challenging.
So what I came across was the second was kind of pertains to the development of consciousness and the root of destruction. So now that we've come into being as creations, now we have to come to grips with the rise of consciousness of who we are and why we're here, and that's really not pretty. Throughout most of this whole set is it's a lot of disruption, but a lot of times that's what growth takes. Like you have to kind of knock it all down before you can rebuild it back up to where you want it. Yeah.
So we are going to be starting with Hagalaz, and now this is also called. Oh wait, no, sorry. The second Aett is also associated with the first rune, right? So it's either I feel like I've heard it called Hagalaz Aett or Heimdall's Aett.
Heimdall's. I think. What did I have? I think Heimdall's Aett is the more popular, but in some of the books that I have, like the first book that I have, it was Hagalaz, I think. And so, but they're not like, and then I went and researched it. I'm like, is that the same dude? But it's not.
It's not. It confused me because I actually, this is I'm gonna let my geek show for a moment, but like I didn't know who Heimdall was,
Mhm.
and then I just watched Thor Ragnarok last night, so I was reminded.
That's my favorite one.
I was reminded that Heimdall was the dude that like managed the
The Bifrost dude.
Bifrost thing, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, he was like a dude like in the mythology, and I know this is terrible. This is the extent of my mythological understanding is literally the Thor movies right now. So I've got more studies to do, but I didn't know that he played such a significant role. But yeah, very different energy than Hagel.
Yeah. He was like the watcher for all the gods. So he was the one that managed the Bifrost. He had his horn that he would sound. I'm not even going to try to pronounce what it's called, but it's in the notes in the little download thing. But so he's the one that basically, when anything went down, he was tooting his horn, and Thor would come a running. That's kind of how it went.
Alrighty, okay, so that's pretty lines up well with the Avengers or with the Thor movies. Okay,
It
so
does, actually. Yeah.
cool. So our first rune is Hagalaz, and this is what the illustration looks like in Nina's book.
Which I love. That's Loki's daughter. That's the half dead, half alive.
Hell, right?
Oh yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think that's who that is, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the goddess Hel.
Goddess Hel, yeah. Which I thought was really interesting, because if you think of it in terms of coming into the next, that rising of consciousness, you have the duality there, which is really interesting.
I love that. So top down, I guess we're looking at this. So this was the rune I always associated with the tower before.
Mhm.
I don't know how that's going to unfold as we study. I guess we'll see. But it does. I have seen Hagalaz for hail and for
Hail,
destruction, which of course, like
Yeah.
back then, like hail was. I mean, even now, hail is terribly devastating to crops, things you're trying to grow, your structures, your homes, things like that. So interesting, this concept of destruction.
Yeah, and I think that's really kind of where we get that idea, is that it's in most of the references, it is referred to as like an omen of sudden change, which is definitely a tower energy, right?
Totally. Yeah.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, sometimes working with the cards for a while, you learn tower isn't always like the worst thing ever.
It's
like,
true.
tower
Yeah.
is good.
I've definitely drawn the tower for myself, like when I've had big moments in my life, like changing jobs. They're positive changes, but you do have to completely undo what you've got to start the new thing, right? But
Yeah.
this is where it's interesting, because already this is conflicting, or not conflicting, I guess, but it seems similar to that Thurisaz rune, this idea of destruction breeds creation. So I'm curious to see where and how they differ as we study it, but that'll be really interesting.
Yeah. That one I have more, it seems to be more related to outward things, as far as like, again, so this is what we're talking about now, is my first pass. And then when we go back to the group, I'll add in the more stuff that I find, but it seems to be more about outward destruction, whereas the Thor is more about inward type of destruction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In my very basic, very rudimentary understanding of the runes.
Fair enough. So the next one in our second Aett is Nauthiz. Nauthiz?
Yeah, I think I've seen it Nauthiz and Nauthiz.
Oh.
I'm not sure which one. This one is with a TH and one is with a D.
Oh, Nauthiz. Okay.
Nauthiz and Nauthiz. I haven't seen any real differences in the terms of how it's interpreted, just in spelling.
Yeah. Ooh, and time set on that Thurisaz versus Hagalaz point. Destruction with hammer versus destruction with hail. One you control, one you do not.
That is a really good point.
I love that so much. Okay, cool. So I always saw this as need, like the need, fire, and need. So I'll be interesting to see if that changes. What did you have in your kind of preliminary?
In the preliminary, it was interesting because some of them really focused in on the need aspect, and some of them focused in on necessity as being two very different things, which I thought was really interesting. Definitely associated with like distress and difficult times. Some of them related it back to like karmic challenge. And there's a lot of even just the small reference materials that I have, there was kind of wildly different interpretations. So
I did this too. I actually drew this as a daily rune last week, and I kind of had a little temper tantrum in my head because one said need, and like one of my sources, what did it say? Oh my god, I have to tell you now, because it was just, I was like, what are you even talking about? It called it constraint.
Yeah.
Keyword. And I was like, huh? I've always thought this was need. So I'm looking forward to studying this one and getting to know it a little better, because this was the one that I encountered, like you said, the most wildly different interpretations.
And I'm
So
curious to see in the group what everybody adds to it, to see like what kind of the general consensus is, because in some of the materials, it's like, oh, well, it's considered the sexual rune and it's associated with that kind of need. And then in some other ones, it's like, no, it's about addiction and it's about constriction and restraint. And so that's two very different aspects.
Yeah. And there's some interesting things here. So in the chat already, Gingerface says that you have it as constraint. Mm-hmm. And Acilian says a constraint / distress creates a situation that makes you face your needs. So maybe that's where the bridge is going.
The tie-in that we need.
Yeah, that might be it. Yeah. So I guess we'll see as we study this week.
That one I think is
sorry. Yeah. I'm really interested about that one. That's probably one of the ones I'm going to spend the most time on, because I've already encountered so much like confusion on that one. This one is one I think that I haven't had as much trouble with, at least in my preliminary, and that's Isa.
Yeah.
Or ice.
Ice, yeah. And so this one is more about, it seemed to be more about, like, you know, if you think about ice as being a symbol of stasis, a symbol of frigidity, it's like things are not moving. You're just ice. And I think that seemed to be something that really was the key through across the different materials that I looked at. But there was also some references in terms of like poverty, if you're looking at it in terms of a more physical, you know, having poverty in your material world. Then if you look at it in spiritual terms, it can be more about like a crisis of the soul. Like you're not progressing, you're stuck in the ice in your spiritual progressions. You're just
you're not moving forward. But
the other thing I saw that was interesting was to keep in mind that ice thaws eventually. And you know, even back when the weather was vastly different than it is now, ice still thaws. The ice age thawed. Yeah. Eventually.
Like there's like a this too will pass kind of energy.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting. It's like, it's not, you know, things are at a standstill right now, but that doesn't mean they're always going to be. So I thought that was really interesting.
I really like that perspective. Yeah, I think that one's going to be one of the ones hopefully I don't have to spend as much time trying to understand, because I feel like that one's coming across pretty clearly. This is another one that I've had an easier time with in general. So we're on to Jera.
Jera, yeah. So that refers to the year, season of harvest. That one for me, same. It's kind of seems to be a general consensus of it's about the growing time, the harvest time, fruitfulness and prosperity. That seemed to be a really common thread.
Yeah. Harvest, the idea of like you reap what you sow kind of energy here, like you're getting the results from prior actions kind of thing. Definitely that.
A cycle of things, because one of the things that I noticed in kind of my preliminary was the first few runes that we looked at, the first 3 runes, they're all icy, watery runes.
Oh.
So you have hail, right? If I'm remembering that correctly, you have hail.
Then fire.
So they're all distressful runes. That's what I'm trying to get at. They're all kind of
not good.
Challenging runes. How's that? Challenging ideas.
Challenging is good, yeah. And then suddenly it's like things are shifting.
Yeah, it's like you gotta get that idea of, okay, so you had all this challenge, but you planted these seeds and now all of this stuff's gonna grow from it. So I thought that was
this is like the tides are turning kind of energy after those first 3 runes. That makes sense actually.
So like, coming after the 3 harsh runes, it conveys a sense of relief and a return to life.
Love that. I love that. All right. So
we also mentioned that these first few runes that we're talking about, I think all of the runes in this, maybe in this one, are not reversible. No, there's only 2 that are reversible in this because they look the same.
Yeah. Oh, well, actually, I have a note here that Nauthiz isn't reversible.
Right.
So which one is Algiz is reversible?
This is reversible, and Perthro.
Oh yeah, Perthro.
And I think that's it in this one. I think the rest of them are considered not reversible runes, which is interesting.
Perthro's interesting because I guess it can be reversed based on if the cup is up versus down.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is kind of, it would face left or right. Oh, I see. Okay, I was trying to picture how does it go reverse? That's interesting. So there's a lot more kind of, you get which, like the energy, it's like what you see is what you get kind of energy through this.
I think so. And they seem to be a bit more like, I don't know if this tracks at all, but it seems to be a bit more, it is what it is type of thing. It's just, you kind of got to deal with it and move on, right?
Interesting. Athelian just said the first 3 runes of this Aett are also associated with the 3 Norns or fates.
3 fates.
Oh.
Really interesting.
I want to look that up and figure out which is which. That's cool. That's going to be fun to study.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to Eihwaz. Eihwaz is one of those runes that I feel like is a very big energy and is something that I feel like I'm looking forward to studying this one because I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. But the keywords in Nina's books are keyword is yew tree.
Mm-hmm. I saw that basically is transition. So when you think about the yew tree is the tree of life and death. So this is like big energy, big life and death energy.
Right.
Which I thought was really interesting.
And is associated with, so Yggdrasil, or how do you say that? Yggdrasil? Yggdrasil, the Norse tree of life, is the representation of Eihwaz, it says in here.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be really interesting. I'm really excited about this one because this is a rune that I draw a lot, mm-hmm. especially lately, and also is a rune that I am drawn to a lot, which is interesting. I'm curious to see what comes through with this one for sure. This is one I'm really excited to study.
One of the things that I found in just my initial was that it speaks to the gateway or the threshold to a source of power.
Ooh.
So I thought that was really interesting because not sure what kind of power. It'll be interesting to see.
I'm excited about that. When you said that, I got this imagery. I think it's from the Star Child Tarot, but I just suddenly had this imagery of I think it's the Knight of Swords. It shows this figure on the end of the cliff and like a toe's kind of dangling down or a foot is dangling down and there's this like big portal in the sky beneath. Mm-hmm. That's literally the image that just popped in my head when you said that about the threshold of power. So that's exciting. I want to see what that's all about.
That's very cool.
And Perthro, it says, okay, I've never looked this up in Nina's book before, but the keyword that Nina has here is fruit. But I've always seen this as the dice cup. And we do see the 3 Norns actually here, which is really interesting.
I found it, I tried to find that kind of fruit connection. And I need to read a little bit deeper into Nina's books. I was kind of just flipping through to start. But most of what I came across was it relates to like a game. Or that's where we get the idea of lot or cup.
Yeah.
And this seems to be the one rune that like nobody really knows what it means.
Really?
Every book I looked at when I was putting together preliminary information, it was like, it's the rune of mystery whose original idea is elusive. So like the one thing that everybody agrees on is that nobody knows exactly what it means. Interesting. Really interesting.
And this is actually one of the first ones when I first started doing daily rune draws that like months ago. This was one of the ones that stuck for me because of the dice cup reference and the idea of fate and of like rolling the dice. Yeah. So that's what I've run with this whole time. So I'm actually like just opening up the page and seeing it said fruit. I was like, what do you mean fruit? What are you talking about? What's going on in here? So this will be a fun one to study then too.
Yeah, it seems to be that like, you know, we're looking at a game or lot casting, but we're also talking about, you know, if you look at fate, that's a game that somebody else is playing with us, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. And also a lot of times talked about like hidden layers or when things just really aren't that clear.
Yes.
That was really interesting.
And somebody said here, so Sign said it's because it's the youngest rune, it got stuck in after the fact. I thought that was, sorry, I'm going to put these comments up. For some reason, I thought that was the word rune, the blank rune that was stuck in after the fact. Was this one was also added to the alphabet near the end then? Is that what that's interesting.
I haven't seen that one. That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh,
Definitely seem to be related back to like play and entertainment too as well. But I think if you dive deeper into it, there was definitely that thread of the destiny and the fate, and the sometimes it's just not in your control.
interesting. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to researching that one. Here's one that I feel like I've also had an easier time remembering in general.
Yeah.
Algiz and this idea of protection. I think because the rune looks like a face on antlers, it's been really easy for me to remember this one as the elk. It's elk, right?
Yeah.
So that one, this one feels a little bit more straightforward to me. But I don't know. Yeah, I've said that before.
Yeah. This one to me is one of those that I'm like, so where is the difference between this and like the protection we see and like Thor's, yes. You know, that'll be interesting to see, because if we think of it in terms of moving through this progression, they kind of on the surface seem to almost speak to the same thing. It's this idea of like protection from harm, being, you know, guarded. But then I also saw that it could also indicate that, you know, you need to be on your guard type of thing.
Interesting.
So I'm curious to see where the deviation between the two is, because they feel like they have kind of similar energies to me.
Interestingly, though, this feels like I'm about to make another geeky reference, but what are the names of those things that Harry Potter conjures to protect himself?
Oh yeah, those little
what are those called? Anyway, those Patronus.
Yes.
Patronus. This is what this makes me think of, almost like that sort of protection from almost like divine protection. Whereas I feel like Thurisaz is much more you're protecting yourself in an active way. So it'll be interesting to see, because actually the first Aett seems to be more of that divine energy. And yet this feels like that a little bit to me. Like when I picture like an elk coming out of the woods to like protect me, this feels very like other outside of myself and divine and guardian angel-y. Whereas that first Aett feels more forceful and warlike in a way, which almost feels like they could be reversed
they almost feel different. Yeah, like they're almost like in the wrong spot.
In the wrong spots. Yeah, so I'm really curious about this one, but I have always felt when I've worked with this rune from making my own sigils and stuff, this one has always stuck to me as one that is shieldy. Very shieldy. So maybe more passive protection than active protection. I'm curious if that will actually.
Yeah, there was a lot of mention to like magical protection too. Yeah.
So the Patronus might make a great like. We'll see. We'll see if it plays out in the actual research. Yeah. But that might make a good mental image for that rune. Okay, so that brings us to Sowilo or Sowilo.
Yeah.
As our final Aett in this rune, or in this Aett. Final rune in this Aett. I said it backwards, but yeah.
Yeah, this one is interesting. I mean, it's basically, it means sun, right? That's what it means. But I found that for the most part, it spoke to kind of like that source energy, which again, see, now we're going back to that really big ideas. Yeah. So it's really interesting. But one of the things that I saw in it was that it relates to the forces that lead to personal growth and expansion.
Yeah.
So, you know, not wholly unlike the sun card in the tarot. I mean, you can kind of draw some similarities there too.
It definitely seems similar to me, especially when you read it here. It's like life force, understanding, clarity. So interesting keywords. I'm really excited for is because they seem, again, I feel like we're at that surface level, and it's going to be, I'm really excited to see what's going to come through in the next couple of weeks as we sort of dive into them, because I think some of them seem so simple on the surface, and then you start researching, you're like, oh, there's this other layer. So cool. So I'm really excited about that. Oh, Asilian says, I've always seen Algiz as a purely defensive, while Thurisaz has consequences. So like a wall versus barbed wire. Oh, that's a cool difference. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like when I'm doing protection magic, I often think of Algiz as a really good rune to use versus Thurisaz. And maybe that's because of that different kind of energy. And Stein says, Sowilo is my homie, ancestral carnelian in a symbol. Ooh, cool.
That's a cool.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how those play out. I can't believe we're in the second Aett. I'm so excited. And I really want to start getting some of this read.
That's fun.
I'm really stoked, actually. So hopefully I'll be able to start making some progress on this over the next couple of weeks, because I think just generally having story and having connections, even just something memorable to tie a little bit in will be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Fun stuff. Okay, so we've got 2 weeks more of 8 more runes to study. So 4 this coming up week, and then 4 the following week.
Mm-hmm. And then another one of these.
Yes. So our next live stream will be on Saturday, August 4th. Am I doing that right? No, Saturday, August 8th.
8th.
Calendar helps. Saturday, August 8th, right here on this channel at 11 a.m. And we'll do a similar kind of thing. So we'll touch base about the previous, the runes of the second Aett, and then we'll introduce the runes of the third Aett, which will be awesome. So if you are into the deeper dives, you can either follow along on your own and then just check in with us next live stream, or you can join us in the Facebook group and dive into it with the posts and see all the other things. Definitely, if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to comment below with your thoughts and perspectives on these runes that we've been talking about, as well as any resources you want to share with other people who come into this video later. I think that will really, really help. Fun. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about what's coming next. I think because some of these runes, I know that I'm really excited to see what I'm going to uncover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been exciting because the first part was kind of like, oh, just kind of gloss over it, right? And now I'm into the second pass. So I'm like really diving into all the nitty gritty details of it, which is really interesting. And then having everybody else add, that's been huge, because there's sometimes people say stuff in the group. I'm like, and that's what makes it clicks. It's not something I read in a book. It's something somebody said in the group that just makes it click for me. So that's been really interesting.
Yeah, I'd say arguably have had more aha moments from other people's comments than from the books I'm reading, because like you said, it's like you get the basis of understanding, and then people start talking about it, and you're like, oh, that's how you integrate this information from over here.
Yeah,
Love it.
Like making real life references, right? Where we're like, oh, now I get it. Like, so whoever said like the thorn is like, depending on what side of the thorn you're on, right? That can be good or bad.
I love that. Yeah.
That helps it click for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was super fun. Remember to be subscribed here on Supportive Tarot, and also over on Dawn Michelle's channel, Boho Tarot, because good things coming, and this has been really, really, really fun. We've got at least a couple more live streams coming your way in this series. So check out the links down below if you want to join the Facebook group and all the good things. And we will see you guys all in the next one.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.